In a converted storage closet on the southwest side of Chicago, one man throws a punch as Johnny Cage. He swaps costume and throws a punch as Scorpion. He swaps again and becomes Sub-Zero, the ninja built to kill the first two. Daniel Pesina was all of them. In the first Mortal Kombat, he played Johnny Cage, Scorpion, Sub-Zero, and Reptile, filmed one frame at a time off a borrowed camcorder. He also ran the martial arts. Midway had built the game to star Jean-Claude Van Damme. Van Damme passed, and a Chicago Wushu competitor filled the hole with his own kung fu. That closet footage became Mortal Kombat, the machine behind Get Over Here and Finish Him. Pesina's moves are still copied 3 decades later. Then, after the sequel, he vanished from the franchise he had helped build. Every fighter he created was handed to other men. Fans repeat one tidy reason for it. That reason is wrong, and the real one ended in a federal courtroom with a survey run on his own face. The room was barely a room. John Tobias, the game's co-creator and Pesina's lifelong friend, had a Hi8 camera borrowed from his father and a backdrop held together by hand. There were no crash mats at first. For several days, the team worked 8 hours at a stretch, grabbing 30 frames of video for each move, then cutting them down to 8 to save memory. Johnny Cage was the first character they shot, which is why Pesina calls him the father of Mortal Kombat. Every punch, block, and kick in the finished game began as Pesina moving in that closet. When the design called for a spear attack, Pesina reached for a rope dart, a real Chinese weapon used to pull riders off their horses. He threw it, dragged an opponent forward, and the room turned that motion into Scorpion's signature line. The head that flies off in Johnny Cage's fatality came from Pesina too. He pitched it as a joke about hitting a man hard enough to take it clean off. A crew member watching them work coined a phrase for what the camera caught: personality in the pixels. The gear matched the budget. Divisio's Kano mask was a Halloween store prop glued to his face, first with spirit gum, then with real glue that tore his skin when it came off. Pesina shot enough footage for several different ninjas, each one a recolor of the same body. One performer became the hero and both masked killers hunting him. That is not a small credit buried in a manual. That is most of the roster of the game that redrew the arcade. Forgotten Fists exists to document the people the record wrote out of their own success. The rest of this one follows how the man behind 4 Mortal Kombat fighters lost the legal right to be a single one of them. Midway never wanted a Chicago martial artist. The company wanted a movie star. Mortal Kombat began as a pitch built around Jean-Claude Van Damme, modeled on his 1988 film Bloodsport, at the peak of his fame. Van Damme passed, Ed Boon and John Tobias were left holding a fighting game with no face to sell it, so Tobias called the people he trusted. Pesina had first fallen for martial arts as a kid watching Bruce Lee move as Kato in The Green Hornet. He grew into a Wushu competitor who drilled under Chinese national team coaches and taught at the Lakeshore Athletic Club in Chicago. He was not an actor who learned a few moves for a job. He was a fighter who could throw the real thing on camera and make it read on screen. He and Divisio had already worked as extras, playing Foot Clan ninjas in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2. Ho Sung Pak, who would become Liu Kang, doubled Raphael in the same film. This was a crew of Chicago friends who already fought for a living, not strangers hired off a list. To pitch the game, Pesina, his younger brother Carlos, and Divisio snuck into the studio near 10:30 at night and taped moves for Tobias. Pesina pushed for Chinese ninjas over the Japanese ones in every other movie of the era. When Midway first rejected the concept and chased Van Damme instead, Pesina was furious because the ideas being handed to a Hollywood star were his own. Then Van Damme walked, and those ideas came back to the man who invented them. Johnny Cage was never really Van Damme underneath. Pesina modeled Cage on Iron Fist, the Marvel hero, before the team settled on spoofing an action star. But the contract he signed to do all of this would decide everything after it, and almost nobody weighed the one word that mattered. Everything Pesina lost later traces back to a single line in that contract. The deal covered one thing: the arcade cabinet. It said nothing about home consoles, because in 1992, nobody in that closet expected the game to leave the arcade. The plan was 200 cabinets and a modest payday. The actors were offered $3,000 each, or 1 arcade machine per game, and that was the ceiling. Divisio later said he should have taken the cabinet. The paperwork was work for hire, which meant whatever they filmed belonged to Midway, and today belongs to Warner Brothers. When Mortal Kombat detonated and Acclaim rushed to port it to the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, the cast was suddenly asked to sign modified paperwork because the home rights had never been in the first contract. The images were already shot, the likenesses were already in use. They had built characters worth a fortune and signed everything away for the price of a used car. There was a strange side effect of not being Midway staff. When the press wanted someone to defend the violence, Boone and Tobias could not comment, so they sent reporters to Pesina, who had helped make the thing, but answered to no one. He became a public face for a game that paid him almost nothing. In their own neighborhoods, some parents turned on the cast for making a game blamed for teaching children violence. Liz Malecki, who played Sonya Blade, found that schools would no longer book her fitness talks once they learned what she had helped create. They were promised more than once that they would be looked after when the game did well. Acclaim later handed the original actors a trophy. By DeVizio's own telling, the franchise made billions while the people in the closet got a handshake and a keepsake. The game was about to do well beyond anything the industry had seen. On September 13, 1993, Acclaim launched the home version behind a marketing campaign it named Mortal Monday. The scale was absurd for the time. Acclaim booked nearly every company capable of making the cartridge chips, so the world's supply bent toward one game. Analysts expected 3 million copies to sell. By one account from inside the project, the game earned more than $50 million on its first day on shelves. Nintendo forced the blood out of its version and swapped in sweat, and the bloodiest Sega Genesis version outsold it by roughly 5-1. By DeVizio's account, Kano's heart rip even reached the cover of Time. The violence dragged the game in front of the United States Congress, alongside Sega's Night Trap, and the hearings that followed produced the ESRB rating system that still sits on every game sold today. The panic backfired as advertising. Every warning made the game more wanted. Pesina's face and body were on the promotions, the cartridges, and the merchandise. His contract had paid him $3,000. So, Pesina did the thing the small print never expected. He sued. He argued that his likeness, his name, and his persona had been used without permission in the home versions, that the arcade deal had never covered them, and that the profit pouring into Midway, Acclaim, Nintendo, and Sega was built in part on him. On paper, it looked winnable. His movements were in the game. His name flashed on the screen when a player won. He had helped invent the very characters the whole business was selling. What he did not see coming was the defense Midway would run and the survey it would place in front of a federal judge. The strategy did not deny he was in the game. It denied that anyone could tell. Midway's lawyers built their case around a single brutal idea that the public could not recognize Pesina at all. To prove it, the defense ran a survey. They showed 306 Mortal Kombat players a photograph of Daniel Pesina beside the character Johnny Cage and asked them to link the two. 6% could. The number that ended his case was 6. 94 out of every 100 players looked at the man who built Johnny Cage and did not find him inside his own creation. The court noted that his video images had been heavily altered before they entered the game, and that his name showed for only 8 seconds and only when a player won. In 1996, the judge granted summary judgment against him. The ruling held that Pesina was not a widely known martial artist, and that his name and likeness had carried no commercial value before Mortal Kombat existed. In the eyes of the law, he was not Johnny Cage. Anyone in that costume could have been. Pesina fought it as one man against a company with a blockbuster to protect. Malecki lost a parallel fight for the same reason. A judge found the cast had consented to the filming, and that since the characters were a group effort, no single performer owned one. The performances had been so thoroughly digitized, recolored, and rebuilt that the court could not locate the human beings underneath them. Pesina had vanished into the character while the character was still on the screen, and a federal court put that finding in writing. He was erased by the very process that made him famous. The ruling did not fade. It still surfaces in legal writing about who owns a digitized human likeness, a question the games had raced ahead of. The claim most fans repeat about his exit is the wrong one. From Mortal Kombat 3 onward, the characters Pesina built were handed to other performers. John Turk took over Sub-Zero and then the rest of the ninjas. Chris Alexander pulled on Johnny Cage's sunglasses in Mortal Kombat Trilogy. The popular story says Pesina was fired for appearing in an advert for a rival arcade game, BloodStorm, wearing his Johnny Cage costume. It is a clean story, and it is a myth. Pesina has said he took that ad openly, named a deliberately absurd fee for it, and the makers paid without blinking. In a 2018 interview, both Pesina and Tobias rejected the firing story directly. Tobias said the two had already gone their separate ways by then, and that Midway barely registered the ad while it was busy fighting Street Fighter for the arcade floor. The advert was a symptom, not a cause. What actually cut him loose was the lawsuit and the work for hire Inc. that turned every character into company property. Turk arrived in Mortal Kombat 3 in 1995 and inherited the rest of the ninjas soon after. Pesina's face was gone from the series he started. His next moves went nowhere. He and Carlos quietly helped build a rival called Tattoo Assassins that never reached arcades. He headlined an Atari fighting game named Thea Realm Fighters, cast as a fighter called Spark, and it was shelved before release. He was not pushed out for disloyalty. He was written out for asking to own what he had made and losing in court. His brother Carlos made the opposite choice, stayed with Midway, and still works at its successor studio today. Carlos does not talk much about any of it, and the company that owns Mortal Kombat now seems to prefer it that way. There is a version of this story where Daniel Pesina turns bitter, and it is not the one that happened. He still teaches Wushu in Chicago at his own school decades after the closet shoot. He works conventions as the man behind the masks, signs photographs of Scorpion and Sub-Zero, and jokes online under the tag Steal My Kung Fu. A few of the old cast reunited on screen in 1996 for a low-budget martial arts film called Book of Swords, Pesina playing a hitman alongside other faces from the games. Years later, he turned up in a video game spoof film as a character named Sasori, which is simply the Japanese word for scorpion. The joke was on the record even when the credit was not. Rich DeVizio, who handed Scorpion the words "Get over here," spent years working the plumbing aisle of a Home Depot. Carlos stayed inside the company and stayed quiet. Pesina never hid. He kept the moves, kept the school, and kept showing up where the fans were. The school has a name, the Chicago Wushu Guan, run by a teacher who was once half the roster of Mortal Kombat. The franchise rolled on for 30 years without any of them credited as its original face. 2 disputes still sit unsettled in the record. Pesina says the head-popping fatality was his idea in that room. The official design history has told it a different way. DeVizio insists the "get over here" moment was his own invention, and points to behind-the-scenes footage he says was cut to bury it. The people who were actually in that closet have never fully agreed on who made what, and the paperwork that might settle it was written to belong to someone else from the start. What is not in dispute is the size of what they built while no one was paying them for it. In 2026, a new Johnny Cage arrived in cinemas, played by Karl Urban, a movie star cast as a washed-up actor clawing his way back into relevance. Warner Brothers owns the character now, the same way it owns the closet footage a Chicago Wushu competitor shot in 1992. Across town, the first Johnny Cage still teaches the moves that built the franchise, still recognized on sight by the fans who know the story, and still, in the record of one federal court, a man the public could not pick out of his own creation. The fighters he made will outlast everyone still arguing over them. The question of who those characters truly belong to was never answered on the record. It is still open.